The first time Emily Carter thought she could sleep through the alerts, she was wrong. Her phone vibrated on the kitchen counter 3 times while she rinsed a mug. When she wiped her hands and glanced at the screen, the bank app was a small white rectangle of bad news. A new loan had been approved in her name, an auto loan application pending, and a balance that made her heart stutter. $68,000. For a minute she simply stared, because staring is a cheaper, quieter form of disbelief than screaming. Then the professional part of her brain, the part that had learned to triage crises for clients at Meridian Communications, kicked in. She called the fraud line. She put a freeze on accounts. She filed a preliminary report online, the cursor blinking at the end of a form that required clinical descriptions of what felt, to her, like a very personal violation. Only later, when she had calmed enough to think, did the family picture in her feed catch her eye. Her brother Caleb leaning against a brand new sedan, a grin wide under the dealership's fluorescent glare. Her parents, Michael and Karen, were there, toasting like an audience for someone they'd decided belonged at center stage. The timestamp, 5 hours earlier. The fact that the IP trace showed the loan application originated from the house where her parents lived was a numbing puzzle piece that slid into place too easily. She drove there without thinking, some animal urge pushing her toward explanation, toward confrontation. The driveway was crowded, the garage full of boxes to be loaded into the new vehicle. The scent of roast and citrus peel and that particular clean of suburban houses greeted her. Her mother opened the door with the practiced warmth of someone who performed generosity on cue. Karen cried, nearly colliding with her. "You're here," said. "We were just talking about helping Caleb get on his feet." Caleb's grin was the kind of entitlement that could be disarming if you'd never seen it before, but Emily had seen it 1,000 times. The smile that assumed the world owed him arrangement and applause. "They helped me with the down payment," he said easily, voice sweetened with the expectation of admiration. He waved a hand toward the sedan like it was an offering. She didn't speak then, she showed them the messages on her phone instead. The digital proof was stark and ugly. Confirmation emails, an approval notice, an electronic signature that matched her name and social security number. It listed transactions and dates and an address that matched her parents' home network. "Must be a mistake," Michael said first, the default stance of a man who believed perception was a thing to be managed. "Banks make errors." "Someone forged my signature," Emily said. Her voice didn't tremble. It was the voice she used in meetings when deadlines shifted and stakeholders panicked. "Someone applied for a loan in my name. The IP trace points to this house." There was a pause long enough to let the gravity thin the room. Karen shuffled papers in a manner so practiced it seemed choreographed. We thought we were helping," she said finally, as if phrasing it as a benevolent misstep could transmute theft into charity. "Caleb needs credit to start a business. You know how hard it is these days. We never meant to hurt you. You used my identity without my consent," Emily replied. "That isn't help. That's a crime." Caleb's face shifted. He was quick to reframe, to redirect, to present his action as an act of family solidarity. "It was for the family. We weren't trying to harm you." When the police officer took the fraud report 2 days later in the quiet of the station, he listened with the same mixture of methodical patience and bookish sympathy he would lend any citizen. He took Emily's statements, scanned her documentation, and told her the investigators would contact her. In the meantime, the bank froze the accounts associated with the loan. At Meridian, work was both refuge and pressure. Emily dove into the Westridge crisis response she'd been hired to manage 2 months earlier, pasting her focus onto timelines and talking points the way an artist might concentrate on a single stroke. Her team pulled together and filled in gaps. Maya, longtime friend and account director, camped in the office with her late into the nights, offering coffee and steady shoulders. "We'll sort this out," Maya said more than once, like a mantra and a promise. "You didn't do anything wrong." But the fallout seeped into days in small, humiliating ways. Collections calls rattled through her phone. Her credit score pinged in mid-conversation like a judgment. There were weeks of paperwork, notarized statements, and subpoenas. Every time an investigator called, Emily had to retell the scene at her parents' dining table and watch the words land in other people's mouths like a foreign language. The bank's fraud analyst called with a tentative update 2 weeks in. "There's more," he said. "We pulled an IP log and there's a match with a device assigned to the home network at 42 Willow Lane. Also, we have a printout here with handwriting consistent with your mother's notes." Hearing proof is different from having proof. Proof makes things formal. It also clarifies one terrible truth with crystalline clarity. Someone she had trusted, people she'd shared holidays and grief with, deliberately exposed her to legal and financial risk. "You're going to press charges?" Maya asked one evening as they sat on the office roof, the city lights like a glittering ledger. "I don't know if I want to punish anyone I used to love," Emily admitted. "But I do want them held responsible. I want a record of accountability." Maya squeezed her hand. "Accountability is not vengeance. It's boundaries." While the legal wheels turned, Emily's life began to condense in a way it never had before. Fewer social calls, more deliberation. The bonus she'd earned that quarter. A tidy recognition for a campaign that had pulled an entire brand back from the brink. Arrived in her account like an unanticipated map. She could invest it, she could pay down the whiplash the loan had caused, or she could do something more radical. Buy the lake house, Mrs. Green, the retired teacher who had become an unlikely mentor, advised when Emily told her about the options. They sat at Mrs. Green's kitchen table across a chipped enamel mug of tea, the late summer heat making the window glass halo with light. "Not because you're fleeing them," she said, "but because you're building a place where no one can sign anything without your knowledge." The idea lodged in Emily the way a seed takes root in tilled soil. She searched listings late into the night, fingers tired but steady. She found a small cedar house in Michigan with a wraparound deck and windows that caught the water like glass. It was priced more than she'd expected, but her credit, once restored, plus the bonus could make a down payment possible. It represented a concrete split, a private place that could carry the decisions she made without interruption. In the middle of the investigation, the subpoena arrived at her parents' house. When the sheriff delivered the documents, the house's habitual order dissolved into accusations. Threats softened into bargaining, and bluster became confessional at last. The physical evidence, a USB drive left plugged into a shared laptop and the bank's IP logs, made it impossible for them to maintain the "we meant well" script. Karen's first instinct was to minimize, then to deflect, then to cry. Michael retreated into silence. Caleb, faced with his mother's quavering and the cold logic of the law, moved through a range of emotions quickly. Anger, shame, attempts at rationalization, and finally a fumbling admission. "We thought it would be okay," he said once, voice small. "We thought it was temporary. We never meant to ruin your life." "You did put my life at risk," Emily answered. "It's not just numbers. It's my ability to get a mortgage, a job that cares about credit checks, my financial security. Actions have consequences." In the end, restitution was ordered. The bank reversed the fraudulent loan, the account closed, and Caleb, who was young enough to be salvageable and old enough to be accountable, agreed to a repayment plan under court terms. Emily chose to pursue civil action in a narrow, targeted way that emphasized accountability more than punishment. They apologized in forms that had to be recorded and sometimes did not feel sincere. But they also paid. There was, she discovered, a surprising cleanness to legal records. They documented what happened without the messy theater of family drama. With the fraud marked on public record and her credit restored, she moved forward with the house purchase. Signing the deed was, in its own small way, an exhale. She signed with a steady hand and felt a strange flutter. Not celebratory so much as right. This signature meant something no forged document ever could. It was hers, clean and deliberate. Renovating the lake house became an act of composition. Emily painted the walls at dawn, music low, then spent afternoons assembling shelves and unpacking boxes of books she'd kept in storage for years. She hung on the walls the articles and press photos that represented work she'd poured herself into. A client letter commending a deft crisis turnaround. A magazine piece about corporate communications that quoted something she'd written. She planted lavender along the deck to smell like summers she hadn't had. She put a brass plaque on the bedroom door and painted the words birthday suite in tiny loopy script because ritual was a small rebellion worth keeping. There were awkward conversations. Her mother tried to show up at the closing with a bakery box and a forced smile. "We thought you were making a mistake," Karen said, standing on the doorstep with the frosting still warm under plastic wrap. "We wanted to be part of this." "You were part of the problem," Emily replied, not cruelly but plainly. "You can be part of the solution if you choose accountability. That's up to you." She learned to say no with a firm compassion she'd never given herself permission to use before. When family members asked to visit, she invited them only when she believed the invitation would not be a ploy for leverage. When they called in fits of guilt and panic, she sometimes let the phone go to voicemail. When the media, the small local outlet that did a sympathetic human interest piece on the lake house purchase, called for comment, she declined interviews. This home was not a prop. It was a boundary. The first housewarming was small. Maya and 2 other colleagues, Mrs. Green, and a couple of neighbors whose paths had crossed with Emily's in unexpected ways. They ate grilled salmon and laughed. Someone put a guitar out by the fire pit and played badly but with tremendous heart. The night sky had the kind of depth city lights steal from stars, and Emily felt, in the slow accumulation of daylight and laughter, the tangible difference between being seen and being used. Caleb showed up at one point, late and hesitant. He stood on the edge of the gathering like a child watching a party he'd assumed would never be for him. He had brought a wrapped frame and an apology he'd practiced in his throat. "I found something in Dad's shed," he said finally, voice unsteady. "I found this vintage photo. I thought maybe..." He handed her a photo of her at 7, hair wind-blown on an old tire swing mid-laugh. The photograph was slightly sun-creased but intact, and seeing herself there, uncurated and alone in happiness, felt like a strange kind of rescue. "Thank you," she said, turning the frame over in her hands. "I appreciate it." Their reconciliation was not cinematic. It was a series of small, hesitant steps that required accountability, therapy, and an acceptance that not every wound healed the same. Caleb did counseling. Karen and Michael attended a few family sessions with a mediator. Emily found a therapist, too, a woman who asked questions under which she uncovered patterns of scarcity and validation that had shaped her family's finance and affection. Time does most of the heavy lifting. Months rolled into a year where apologies intermittently appeared and were sometimes sufficient and sometimes not. Her parents tried to remake their relationship with her. Sometimes they succeeded in small ways, like calling without a demand tucked inside. Sometimes they slid back into old habits. Emily learned to notice the difference between real remorse, which came with changed behavior, and performative rituals designed to shorten the uncomfortable distance between them without any real work. Her work at Meridian flourished in the quiet safety of evenings at the lake house. She took fewer after-hours calls and welcomed them only when they were essential. She built rituals that were not theatrical but nourishing. Reading on the porch, planting bulbs for spring, a quiet ritual breakfast every Sunday in the birthday suite no matter the calendar. Friends came and sometimes stayed, and those who stayed were the ones who had shown up when the bank app had lit up her life with disaster. On the 2nd birthday since the fraud, she hosted a larger party. Colleagues toasted her promotion to senior director, clients sent notes full of congratulations, and friends brought flasks of whiskey and platters of lemon bars. Her parents came and sat for a while, watchful and careful. There was a small private exchange between Emily and her mother on the dock at twilight. Karen handed over a small box with a single candle and a note, words clumsy but heartfelt. "I'm sorry," she said, voice bare. "I didn't know how to help without taking. I'm trying." "That's all I've ever wanted," Emily answered. "Try. But understand that trying doesn't erase what happened. Trust is rebuilt by small, consistent choices." There isn't a clean, dramatic ending to this story, because few family dramas land in tidy bows. There are, instead, practices and boundaries and a recognition that people can change, or not, and that you can love them across that spectrum or let them go. Emily chose a life that prioritized her autonomy. She pressed charges because her identity mattered. She bought a house as a sanctuary and as a declaration. She held family to account and accepted small reconciliations while refusing to let old patterns erode her newfound stability. Sometimes that meant setting a firm boundary. Sometimes it meant attending a fractious dinner and leaving before the guilt plays started. Sometimes it meant letting the police document what they had done so they could not dance around it with excuses. Sometimes it meant laughing with friends on the dock as the sun fell below the treeline, or reading a book aloud to Mrs. Green because the joy of simple rituals proved to be more durable than any manufactured apology. On quiet nights, when the lake lay black and glass smooth and a heron folded itself into the reeds, Emily would sit on the cedar steps and consider the long chain of small decisions that brought her here. Someone had used her name and nearly ruined her credit. Someone had placed her existence into a ledger as if she were an account to be debited and credited according to preference. She had responded not with fury alone but with strategy, with legal action, with a reclamation of resources, with a home whose keys opened only for her. She had been stolen from, but she had not allowed the theft to define her. The house, the lavender, the birthday suite plaque, the framed press clippings, were not trophies of pain but signposts of intention. In the end, the most radical act was simple: signing her own name to her own life on paper that belonged to her, in a place that no one could access without her invitation.